America's Forgotten War in Siberia, the Russian Civil War intervention from 1918 to 1920. After the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II in 1917 and the collapse of the Russian monarchy, Russia descended into civil war. By 1918, the conflict between Bolshevik Red forces and anti-Bolshevik White forces had spread across the former empire. Amid this chaos, several foreign powers intervened. Japan, the United States, Britain, France, Greece, and Romania all sent troops to Russian territory. Japan deployed the largest force, approximately 70,000 soldiers, into eastern Siberia. The United States sent about 7,000 troops as part of what became known as the American Expeditionary Force in Siberia. Their mission was limited and specific: to guard massive Allied weapons stockpiles in Vladivostok, to help evacuate the 40,000-man Czech Legion by rail and then by ship, to counterbalance Japanese influence, to deliver American food relief, and to stabilize nearby regions without taking sides. From the beginning, this was an unusually difficult assignment. The American force was commanded by Major General William Graves, who adopted a policy of neutrality. General Graves sent dozens of intelligence officers out in the field with interpreters. Through these intelligence officers, Graves maintained the most accurate understanding of conditions on the ground. Due to the small size of the American forces relative to their area of operation, Graves became determined to strictly follow his orders on political neutrality. Additionally, Graves believed that taking sides would worsen civilian suffering. While American troops disliked Bolshevism, if they knew anything about it at all, they were instructed not to participate in Russia's internal political struggle. Their primary responsibility was to protect and operate the Trans-Siberian Railroad. American units often negotiated informal arrangements with local Bolshevik groups. Both sides would avoid each other whenever possible. This uneasy coexistence allowed the Americans to focus on their mission, at least initially. Much of the instability in eastern Siberia came from Cossack forces allied with the White movement. One of the most prominent leaders was Grigory Semenov, a warlord backed by Japan. His troops fought Bolsheviks, but they also committed widespread atrocities against civilians: torture, summary executions, and arson. Japanese authorities supplied these forces with weapons and equipment. General Graves viewed this as deeply destabilizing. He believed that the Cossacks and their Japanese backers posed a greater threat to regional stability than the Bolsheviks themselves. The Americans organized the Civilian Railroad Corps to repair and operate the Trans-Siberian Railway. Their success was substantial and widely acknowledged. The trains ran more reliably than at any point since the war began. This success, however, alarmed the Japanese, who viewed control of the railroad as essential to their own strategic interests. Along the railway, American forces posted notices stating that their mission was to ensure free passage for all, irrespective of persons, nationality, religion, or politics. Ironically, this policy angered both sides in the Civil War. The successful negotiations with local Bolsheviks angered the White forces, who accused the Americans of siding with the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks accused the Americans of helping Whites because, in practice, it was too risky for the Bolsheviks to use the trains, which meant that the trains only benefited the White Russians. Despite the benefits that the American-run trains gave the White forces, the Americans often had more friction with Whites than with Reds. Relations with locals was usually good. Life in Russia was hard enough without the Civil War, and the Americans made it better. Cossack troops frequently arrested workers on the American-backed section of the railroad with flimsy accusations of Bolshevik sympathy. American officers intervened to stop these arrests, leading to repeated and sometimes tense confrontations. By late 1918 and early 1919, the White movement in Siberia was deteriorating rapidly. After large numbers of the Czech Legion had been evacuated, the White forces lost their most effective and reliable military support. Desperate to fill the gap, the White authorities began mass forced conscription. Young men were seized from villages and sent into poorly supplied units. Many of these conscripts deserted at the first opportunity. American soldiers often refused to reveal the hiding places of these draft evaders. Admiral Alexander Kolchak led the anti-Bolshevik White Russian government of Siberia from the city of Omsk. The Omsk government had a large but poorly trained and ill-disciplined army led by corrupt officers. Admiral Kolchak was nominally in charge of the two Cossack groups fighting in Siberia, but held no real control over them. The Cossacks were commanded by warlords who spent more time terrorizing the local inhabitants than they did fighting the Bolsheviks. Partisan groups began to form who were opposed to both the white and red forces operating in their area. Admiral Kolchak urgently requested more military and financial aid from the foreign allies to shore up his war efforts. As aid arrived, corruption expanded and discipline collapsed. In Omsk, leadership was ineffective, chaotic, and disconnected from reality. Admiral Kolchak did not have any intelligence network to keep him informed of where the Red Army was, what ground his forces held, and where reinforcements were most needed. Colonel Charles Morrow of the 27th Infantry Division was commanding 2 companies of troops guarding the last of 4 sectors of the American portion of the railroad. The next section was controlled by the Japanese. The Cossack warlord Semyonov also operated in this Japanese-controlled section. Semyonov wanted to terrorize and pillage a village in Morrow's sector, but Morrow sent his troops to protect the village until Semyonov backed down. As all of this was going on, U.S. soldiers were falling in love with young Russian women, and several hundred weddings occurred up and down the thousands of miles of the American sector of the Trans-Siberian Railway. The Army strongly discouraged soldiers from marrying while overseas, and a marriage required command approval. At the time that these weddings took place, there was no guarantee that these wives would be transported to Vladivostok, transported back to America, or receive any pay benefits. There would be no special rules for their entry into the U.S. They would still need a passport, a visa, a health exam, and to demonstrate literacy. Failure in any category meant denial. While many Siberian wives failed to qualify, the 300 or so Russian war brides that qualified would eventually make their way to their husbands in America. The Army did manage to find room for a number of them on transport ships. The orders that General Graves was given was directly from President Wilson and handed to him in a sealed envelope. The President had made a commitment to the Senate that American troops in Siberia would remain strictly neutral and would not take part in the Civil War fighting. The State Department and most of the War Department was not informed of the strict conditions in the orders, which would put him at odds with them, often for not taking a more active role in helping the White Russians. Even years later, the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover would have retired General Graves on a communist sympathizer watch list. After several American soldiers were kidnapped, firefights erupted. 2 days later, Bolshevik forces attacked an isolated U.S. detachment. 26 American soldiers were killed and 25 were wounded. In response, American reinforcements drove the attackers out, killing hundreds. Bolshevik forces launched another attack against U.S. forces, but this time the Americans were ready and the Bolsheviks suffered heavy losses, while the Americans had just 3 wounded. From that point forward, true neutrality became impossible. Meanwhile, relations with Japan continued to deteriorate. The Japanese forces backed the Cossack forces and funded anti-American propaganda. In September 1919, Cossacks arrested 2 American soldiers. When Graves attempted to secure their release, Japanese officers threatened military action. The Americans responded by taking some Cossack hostages. The crisis ended without combat, but it made clear how close the Allies were to fighting each other. Intelligence reports warned of Japanese plans to incite Cossack attacks on U.S. troops. General Graves also tried to block delivery of 100,000 rifles to the collapsing White Army, predicting they would soon fall into Bolshevik hands. Washington overruled Graves, and when Omsk fell a short time later, the rifles did fall into Bolshevik hands. As the situation worsened, leadership in Washington faltered. President Wilson suffered a debilitating stroke in late 1919, leaving major decisions in limbo. Secretary of State Robert Lansing convened an emergency meeting of the cabinet without Wilson's approval and was later dismissed for doing so. Despite growing danger, Wilson remained reluctant to abandon the railroad and its humanitarian mission. Meanwhile, U.S. diplomats continued advocating for additional aid to the white forces, which were now openly threatening American troops. By the late fall of 1919, the white position was hopeless. The city of Omsk was the capital of the Provisional All-Russian Government and was recognized by all white Russian factions east of the Urals. It was where the Allied powers set up their diplomatic and military offices to work with the white Russian government. Omsk was a priority for the Bolsheviks, and the reformed 5th Red Army was assigned to take it. In a series of decisive battles in October, the Bolshevik armies advanced towards Omsk. Petropavlovsk, only 180 miles west of Omsk, was taken by the 5th Red Army on October 31st. The city of Omsk emptied as the Red Army advanced closer. Western officials fled and Czech units withdrew as the White Army disintegrated in a disorderly retreat. President Wilson's stroke meant that no decisions were possible about the increasingly precarious position of the U.S. forces. General Graves began evacuating American soldiers ahead of the advancing Red Army. The Czech Legion had reserved one of the 2 railroad tracks for their own withdrawal, and also used it to facilitate withdrawal of American soldiers and civilians. Omsk fell to the Bolsheviks on November 14th, which marked the catastrophic collapse of Admiral Kolchak's White Russian government. Entire white formations now defected to the Red Army. Typhus spread among the masses of fleeing soldiers and refugees. Vladivostok descended into chaos. Admiral Kolchak fled east with the gold, but was captured by the now fast-moving Bolsheviks. The Czech troops with Kolchak exchanged the imperial gold reserves for safe passage to Vladivostok. The white movement disintegrated. The Americans and Czechs continued an orderly retreat east. In late December, President Wilson had recovered sufficiently to authorize the evacuation of the U.S. Army, the American Red Cross, and the Czech Legion. On January 5th, 1920, the order to evacuate was received by General Graves. When the order came, there were still Americans traveling along the railroad towards Vladivostok. The American forces withdrew carefully, avoiding interference from Japanese units. It was a tense, orderly, and bitterly cold withdrawal, marked by final battles to hold the railway open long enough to get everyone withdrawn. Once inside the Japanese sector, the Americans were safe from the Bolshevik attacks, but not the Cossacks. On January 10th, 80 Cossacks and an armored train attacked a much smaller platoon of M Company, 27th Infantry, which managed to capture most of the attacking force while leaving the rest dead. Extreme cold hindered the evacuation progress, with temperatures as low as minus 65 degrees Fahrenheit in some areas. The American evacuation included U.S. troops, the Czech Legion, U.S. Red Cross staff, diplomatic personnel, journalists, business people, missionaries, and some Russian employees and dependents. Everyone would initially be evacuated to the Philippines. Some equipment would be left behind. Japan remained in control of Vladivostok until October 1922. General Graves and his staff left Vladivostok on April 1st. The Czech Legion soldiers would continue their evacuation from Vladivostok into late 1920 due to the transport ship backlog. In the end, the intervention failed to shape Russia's future. Thank you for watching this short video on one of the least remembered episodes of U.S. history. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel so you can hear more interesting history.